So, on to the introduction of our speaker. Alyn has a background in accounting, including audit and advisory at Arthur Andersen. He did think for a while that working in beer sales might be more interesting, and I can relate to that, but apologies to any accountants out there. And he had a spell in sales management with Coors Brewers, who I know very well. He then became financial controller at Wincanton, followed by finance director at Compliance and Santa Consulting. Alyn has extensive business leadership experience within the risk management and professional services sectors, and has been with Alcumus for 10 years and as its CEO since October 2017. As I'm sure many of you have read, Alcumus is a leading provider of risk management services, providing a range of technology solutions, advice and support that helps businesses to identify and minimize risks, navigate compliance and create better workplaces to keep people safe. They work with around 40,000 clients worldwide, particularly in the US and obviously here in the UK, and their head office is just outside Cardiff. Alyn's vision and passion of working with businesses to make them safer and more resilient underpins everything Alcumus does, and it is particularly pertinent as businesses plan to operate in a COVID environment. So it's now my pleasure to hand over to Alyn Franklin.
Thanks, Scott. It's great to have the opportunity to be introduced to a new forum. I don't think I know many of you on the call, and as I'm a local, I thought I'd start with a little bit about me. So originally from Tonnerevel, if you know where that is, and grew up convinced I'd either be a professional cricketer or rugby player. But as I wasn't good enough at either, I ended up as a lowly economics graduate, chartered accountant and corporate treasurer instead. I've essentially worked for the same business now for almost 11 years, as Scott has just said. But the joy of being in a private equity environment is that the business has transformed itself several times in that period. And for those Only Fools and Horses fans, the analogy of Trigger's broom definitely springs to mind. In the last few months, Alcumus has been on the front line, supporting businesses with the practical realities of operating within the COVID-19 government guidelines. This has helped us to generate a really strong understanding of the common issues and solutions to overcome those guidelines. And I wanted to share some of that insight with you this evening. For those not familiar with Alcumus, we are a risk management business, so we focus on the health, safety, environmental, and quality disciplines. And in our business, we talk about helping organizations to become safer, healthier, and stronger. We have many strings to our bow and help organizations to manage their risk in relation to people, properties, hazardous substances, and the supply chain. We employ subject matter experts in all our fields, so we employ HR and health and safety professionals, toxicologists specializing in COSH, and quality management specialists. And we've created our own software using that technical expertise. So we serve over 40,000 customers, UK and North America, across a wide range of industries. So from manufacturing and construction to transport, logistics and facilities management and beyond. We also support organizations of all sizes. So we serve over 2,000 sole traders, so no business is too small, as well as numerous FTSE 100 and multinational organizations, so no one's too big. As the government made the announcement, stay at home, protect the NHS, save lives, we saw many businesses close when they didn't really need to. The message was so simple and powerful, and then the social pressure was so great that the following statement within that guidance, work from home if possible, but if it isn't, go to work, was in many cases overlooked. At Alcumus, we took a very early and clear position that in many cases, businesses could operate in line with the COVID secure guidelines without costly or onerous solutions. And we've been working hard to get that message into the marketplace via webinars and thought leadership panels. So with all of that experience over the last few months, what does that journey look like? So firstly, it goes without saying that we must always keep the well-being of our staff at the front of our minds. But it's a far more complicated job in the current environment. What status is each employee? Are they shielding, furloughed, isolating? When did they enter that status? When are they due out of it? What's their physical and mental state? If there is an issue, what support do they need from you? Are they willing and able to come back to work? Maybe transport is now an issue, or childcare, or they have a dependent who's shielding and they fear that they will be the cause of contagion in the household. If they are eligible to come back to work, are they able to be trained in order that they can return productively? So there are a lot of moving parts, and each employee's status can change quickly. So regular touch points are required to keep this information up to date. Having a clear view of the eligibility of your staff to work from home or in the workplace is critical to understanding your ongoing capacity as a business. Critically, it also helps demonstrate to your employees that you care about them. Once you've established eligibility to return to work, you then have to ensure the workplace is and will continue to be COVID secure and be able to prove it where challenged. You obviously need to undertake a comprehensive risk assessment journey tailored around the management of COVID-19. The risk assessments need to be robust and consistent, and any actions arising are assigned to someone and monitored until they are closed out. Ongoing monitoring and review is essential to ensure they are always fit for purpose. We have to remember, it's not enough to do the right things. You need to be able to communicate the approach and recommendations clearly and be able to prove your actions are appropriate when challenged. This is critical to reassuring reticent employees that it is safe to return to the workplace. So if you know the status of your staff and your workplace is COVID secure, the next issue we see customers bumping into is that their supply chain is disrupted, as many suppliers are operating below capacity or are overrun with demand due to common needs, as many businesses are going through their reactivation protocols. The consolidation and lengthening of supply chains over the past decades has exacerbated this problem, and I'm sure is something that many businesses will be reviewing. Lastly, many businesses will have also lost customers as they've ceased trading or rationalized their purchasing. Winning work to repair the business is essential. There is no doubt that customers will now want more reassurance around business resilience given the disruption they've just borne in their supply chain. So proving your credentials around quality and resilience will become very important to win work at a sustainable margin. So ISO standards for business continuity and also health and well-being standards may well become the norm. Now, given Alcumus's expertise in each of these areas, we quickly realized we had a role to play in helping businesses to get back to work. And we provided a free-to-access technology solution to cater for much of what I've just described. We made it free of charge because we wanted to do our bit to help. Our view is that a digital solution is essential, as we do not know how this journey will play out. This is not a time for a stick in plaster. We are going to be living with the consequences of this for some time to come. In terms of how Alcumus itself coped as a business, our process of transitioning into the lockdown period actually went more smoothly than I expected. And I think many businesses found the same. And we were able to revert to home working relatively painlessly. And over the past few years, our strategy had already focused on more remote-based delivery and subscription-based commercial models, and that certainly helped. We do have one field-based business called Isaqua, and that delivers on-site audits for ISO certifications, but we were able to move quickly to a remote-based delivery model to limit the impact. I've spent a lot of my career in crisis management mode, and as the storm clouds gathered in early March, we planned our course of action to ensure our business could survive whilst protecting all employees' roles. We prepared ourselves for the worst, and in mid-March announced potential salary reductions ranging from 15 to 40%, depending on the salary range. And those salary reductions would apply from April onwards. So they had 6 weeks notice to look at their financial circumstances. And we talked about if we could save 25% of our payroll, it could save up to 140 jobs in our worst case scenario. Now, this was a brave move, but it had a remarkably galvanizing effect on the business, as we knew we all had to fight hard for those salary reductions not to be implemented. I shared the cash flow data each week in a video blog, and in mid-April, we'd made enough progress that I was able to defer the implementation to May. And then in mid-May, I was able to remove it as an option entirely. So no salary cut was ever implemented. We used a furlough scheme for 70 of our 500 staff, but topped up wages to 100% to avoid any detriment. We also operated furlough on a voluntary basis, as we recognized that furloughing may have a stigma attached to it, and mental well-being was a critical consideration. We worked really hard on the comms and having some fun on a virtual basis, which we'd still do today, and it actually feels as though engagement and morale has never been so high. Now, in terms of financial performance, We saw cash receipts reducing at a concerning rate through March. So we were down 10%, then 20, then 30, then 40%, and it started to look a little bit scary. Our new business was grinding to a halt, but we have seen it gradually recover, with only marginal increases in churn for even our smallest of customers, which is really encouraging. Our current forecast is that as activity is recovering quite quickly, over the summer, we may get back to something near normal, but the autumn and winter may well be a different proposition. So as you can see, we were very quick to defend the business on the way into the crisis, but we're now being equally bold in making our way out of it. We are clear that the best way through this period is to stay on the front foot. The resilience of the business has been tested successfully, and the focus has now moved on to exit in this period with the biggest possible customer footprint and be seen to have taken a lead in terms of supporting the economy. To underpin this, we've been recruiting a number of key incremental roles and have been very pleased with the calibre of the individuals we've attracted. The intention is that when the health crisis passes, we can shake the economic hangover off as quickly as possible. Trading momentum feels very, very important to that right now, and we know we can always revisit the salary reductions as a way of retaining employees if we need to. Our private equity investor, Inflection, remains very supportive of us. We had 2 acquisition opportunities that we had paused in March, but they have been reignited, and both should complete next week, one in North America and the other in the UK. Looking ahead more generally, I fear the second wave could be far more damaging than the first. I definitely saw viable businesses choose to mothball rather than keep going once they realised they could benefit from the furlough scheme. This means they haven't had to work through the teething problems and get battle-hardened in our new normal environment. This leaves them vulnerable when the scheme unwinds, especially where a second wave then hits. Businesses need to get match fit for a potentially difficult winter as flu season hits and creates potentially significant disruption. I'm sure we all now recognise that the world has changed and we won't be going back to how things were. We're certainly seeing businesses much more focused on the health and well-being of their staff, embracing risk assessments, and considering more seriously the risks of an over-concentrated customer base or an over-consolidated supply chain. Business continuity and risk assessment have gone from being a necessary evil to the core of business planning. The incidence of remote working will clearly rise dramatically. I think we all secretly knew it was within our gift, but the final strands of guilt have now been broken. And I think this is great news in terms of us all seeking talented individuals as we lift the location constraint. But it's also great news for the environment. Progressive businesses will now use this crisis to drive through changes that they may otherwise have avoided or introduced on a much more gradual basis. So that points to productivity improvements and should be welcomed. In some respects, this crisis allows us to reset expectations on a number of fronts. It's pleasing to see the environmental agenda rising to the fore, and we all have a duty to get behind that. Ultimately, we all know that it's a crisis as serious as COVID-19, and we have a window of opportunity to make a step change in our decision-making from both a consumer and business perspective. There are many phrases that are getting worn out through this period. The one I keep repeating is that necessity is the mother of invention. We've all had to adapt, and there's much more adapting to be done. The business's best place to achieve this will have 2 things in their favour: good data and a great culture. Right now, we need the data to understand the status of our employees. How are they doing? What do they need from us? As well as insight on our marketplace and the economy. But we also need a great culture in order that the changes in the workplace are embraced positively. Remote working requires increased trust. Working in sites where social distancing isn't possible also relies on employees' faith in their employer. The perception of risk in relation to COVID-19 is a deeply individual concern and is impossible for us to predict. We need to build trust and empower our employees to take the measures they need to get back to work productively, as a rise in whistleblowing could cripple businesses trying to get back to work. Some businesses have asked employees to sign disclaimers or waivers. This is not what we would recommend. This is a potentially very damaging approach. Now, if I take that data and culture perspective up to a macroeconomic level, our test, track and trace solution needs to work comprehensively if we are to avoid another widespread lockdown. We then need to be very transparent with that data, good and bad, to help rebuild trust in the community. Exiting this pandemic quickly comes down to millions of individual choices. Informing people helps to build trust and is a virtuous circle that will lead to better and better decision-making by individuals and should help break more transmission chains and allow us to get this disease under control. At the moment, we seem to have extremes, with people either cooped up at home or apparently in complete denial and carrying on as if nothing has changed. We all know that somewhere in the middle is the right answer and will allow us to get the economy properly moving again. I ideally hope the government can find the right language and approach to start to unify our attitudes, but I won't hold my breath. In the meantime, I'm sure we're all watching other European companies progress out of lockdown with hope. However, the news in the last few days is not so encouraging, and we'll also watch our US friends with trepidation. I hope that was useful. Back to you, Scott.
Alyn, thank you very much indeed. Hopefully that's given everyone plenty of food for thought, because sort of thinking through the various risk assessments that we all have, different businesses are going to be, or organisations are going to be at different stages, I guess, of how they've dealt with the crisis, how they are going back to work if indeed they've stopped. So please send me some questions and we'll ask Alyn as we go along. I've got the first one here from Ian Price, for those of you who know, from CBI, and he'd like to know your views on the job retention scheme. I've heard in terms of was it a saviour, obviously particularly at the start, but it could prove to be a negative in the long term with some businesses and employees becoming reliant on it. So it'd be useful just to get your views on that, Alyn.
Yeah, sure. I think mixed views, really. I mean, clearly, we all want to make sure that there's as many organisations to trade with out the back end of this as possible. And if that's helped prop them up, then we're grateful for that aspect. But I certainly saw quite a high prevalence of businesses choosing to mothball because the furlough scheme, they would have muscled it out otherwise. And therefore, that blanket approach across all sectors was probably, unavoidable given the speed that they had to move at. That has had an impact, and I fear for what that's going to do to organisations because they won't be fit for the winter. So I think broadly we've got to say well done for mobilising that so quickly. There's a huge cost to it, which I think we'll be paying for some time. It's interesting to see, there are organisations now opting to return the money. And if you think about, maybe a more mature government and leading a bit of a rallying cry to bang the drum that we're all in it together, how far that could go. But I guess that's unlikely. So I think we'll say, we're grateful it was done, but I am concerned about the ripple effects from it. And as I say, there are some businesses that are not going to be as fit as they should be coming out the back end.
Okay, thank you for that. Next one's from David Ainsworth. Do you think the more cautious Welsh Government approach is warranted and will help in the long run, or do you think it will delay the Welsh economic recovery further?
Hindsight's going to be a wonderful thing on that one, isn't it? I think it's interesting. Watching other countries going first is really valuable, isn't it? I mean, I know we all want to get going. From my perspective, to my mind, you could get the economy moving and be far firmer on the social side of things would be the balancing act. I think maybe we've not struck as well as we might have. A lot of confusion out there. I can go to work, but I can't see my grandparents. Well, let's explain that. Let's explain why that is and the importance of protecting the economy. They're not jobs, they're livelihoods, and so on. To look at what we're doing in England, if we can be clear enough on the guidance, there is a route back for Wales from the business perspective far quicker. But if we stamp this out and we don't go back into the second wave, then we'll all be sitting there going, "That was a great idea." I guess hindsight will be a wonderful thing here. I just from my perspective, we should be on the front foot. We should be banging the drum about businesses getting back to work, and it is a separate issue to the social elements that are getting merged in people's arguments. So we should get on with it. We should prioritise the economy further across the board. But that horse has bolted now, hasn't it?
It has indeed. Paul Thurman's asked, based on your varied sector engagement, are there any particular sectors that have reacted better than others?
I think the sector by sector is one way of looking at it. I mean, I drew out culture in terms of what I referred to earlier. It's actually been the culture of the organization that has denoted a big difference in the approach. So the risk appetite of a founder, of an MD, the strength of culture in an organization has determined how fast businesses have gone. Now, clearly, certain sectors are much more handicapped than others, so there is a distortion from that perspective. But you see, a huge amount of creativity across all sectors, depending on the profile of the organization. So that's been the interesting point from my perspective. So where organizations have been on the front foot culturally, where the leadership's been strong, where they've had the data, we've seen some really innovative approaches. One of the things you would say about this pandemic is it is extremely unfair. Most recessions and crises aren't they? But in particular, if you're in certain sectors, then, if you've had the closure orders, then you're in a very difficult spot. But, my local pub, is specializing, they sell in vegetables and takeaway meals. And I think they may be making more money than ever, actually. So I think, sector by sector, I think we've got a full spectrum. It's the culture of the organization, the maturity of the leadership of the organization that has been created the starkest difference from my perspective.
Okay, thanks for that. Just one that occurred to me while we were going through was, to what degree do you think the private sector and companies like yourself can aid government in making some of these key decisions as we, try to reignite the economy in as safe a way as possible? Because it seems to me they've relied on a relatively small range of scientists potentially. And do you think there should be more engagement with companies such as yours to help them make the right choices?
Yeah, completely. I think there'll be a number of us, I'm sure, on the call that could see a way through this with the right approach. There are, the number of organizations that were reaching out for us for help with very little knowledge, even though the government had been on a trail for 4, 6, 8 weeks, the message just wasn't getting through. And using organizations such as ourselves to really get the message out there with some sort of government endorsement, we could really make a difference. It's been quite frustrating. There's been a lot of mixed messages, haven't there, from the government. That's where the leadership issue comes in. People get confused and then you end up with paralysis. We want to get out there. Just give us the new rules. We'll stick to the new rules, won't we? We'll find a way. We're adaptable creatures. Running our businesses, we will be as creative as we need to be. Doesn't feel like we've been given that opportunity, does it? I mean, we've been banging the door down from day one, trying to get the message out there, but it's really difficult with the mixed messages from the top.
Okay, thanks for that. Next question is from Phil Jardine. Professional and office-based businesses seem to have coped better in the last 4 months and are likely to be the last to return to the new normal, given their greater ability to work from home. Do you think this is likely to be a positive or negative in the longer term?
Yeah, that's a good question. One of the first benefits we are seeing is being able to recruit, lift the location constraint and suddenly look a bit further afield, and the talent pool opens up really quite nicely. And that's not only us moving our attitudes on in terms of where people need to be based, but also individuals choosing to opt for roles which are further afield. So I think the catchment for talent expanding is a major benefit, actually. And remote working, I think we've proved it can work. I'm hearing lots of positive stories, in terms of how that's, how that's playing out. I think we have to remember that that's off a bedrock of probably knowing and understanding our colleagues, because we've worked with them. We've built up those personal contracts. We understand the layers of their personality, the water cooler conversations, the meeting rooms, and seeing us in good, bad, and ugly over a period of time acts as a good basis. So purely remote working, I don't think is the answer. I think the office environment will have a role to play, but I think, a much less propensity. So whether that's 2-3 times a month rather than every single day, I think is probably, as an organization, where we are heading. I certainly welcome that. No, I'm not missing the commuting. So that's definitely an upside as well.
Well, fun enough, we had another question from David Snedden along the same lines, which is, do you think we will ever see a full return to office working, or do you think we will see virtual working and digitization, particularly of various business processes, being the way of working, which I think you're saying probably yes.
Yeah, I think so. I think rather than the office be the default, I think we end up in a place where your remote office is the default, and you'll go into the office when there is a reason. And I think that needs some thinking about. That can't just be for a board meeting once a month. I think there's a well-being, there's a morale, there's an engagement element to that. But yeah, I think we flipped this on its head, and the default is at home is what I would expect to see. Part of it, I think we've also all recognizing the environmental benefits, and feel like we're doing our bit. So there's something that I feel slightly, self-righteous that I haven't done, 3,000 miles a month for the last 3 months. I feel like I'm doing my bit, So there are lots of benefits and considerations here, but I think the default being remote is almost inevitable.
Well, someone has got some involvement in transport. That's one of the big questions that we're grappling with moving forward. Paul Forburn's come back in, sort of asking, are there any countries which particularly stand out as being well ahead of the game and being prepared to deal with things? And almost been a bit of an exemplar that we can learn from, because obviously you have clients in the US and elsewhere. So interested to see what the view. Well, are there exemplars and what their views are on us, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's strength and leadership, isn't it? As I said earlier, I've been in crisis management quite a lot in my career, where really the chips have been down, and you learn that wait and see is not an option. You act early, and you're bold, you're decisive, you call it out early, and make that judgment call. We announced salary reductions, and a lot of people didn't understand why, but that set us such a strong platform. We were able to say that we think we'll carry everyone's livelihood through that period. And in the same way, you look at, I guess countries such as New Zealand and the like, bold, decisive action, really clear message. People know where they stand. They buy into it. Someone's held the middle ground. So you don't fill that vacuum with your own noise, which is what we've got in the UK. We've got an office in Toronto. So I've got 100 people out there. We've got, 60% of our customers are in the US, 40% in Canada. And you couldn't get a greater contrast. Canada, they went far earlier than the UK. Schools were out before they'd got into, more than 100 passing away. They've taken a very prudent and progressive approach. And obviously, we're all watching, probably not watching anymore. The United States, we've got our hands over our eyes there, haven't we? Where, they're allowed to almost do their own thing. So yeah, look, you look at the differences, but and maybe we're missing some female leadership. I think that's the common thread as well, isn't it?
Quite possibly. Many have said that. Geraint Rowe is asking, in terms of economic recovery, do you see, or does Alcumus see, a recovery that is V-shaped, U-shaped, or the dreaded W-shaped?
Well, I mean, I would cross my fingers for the U-shaped. I do think the summer period, there could be a small purple patch. I do think there could be a burst of activity. There's a lot of latent demand. There is, a lot of things were paused and people will want to get stuff done. I think we do fear the winter and what that brings. And without the track and trace, without being able to isolate these outbreaks, it looks inevitable now that there will be outbreaks given what's happened in Germany in the last few days. Without that, we risk widespread lockdown. That really will take some air out of the balloon. We're all a little bit jaded in terms of and battle damaged, aren't we, from this initial period? Going back into that will be tough. But I do see us bouncing out the other side. I do. I think, if I look at our retention numbers, even the smaller businesses are still paying us for membership in what might be you'd think one of the things they'd switch off if they were just fighting for survival. So they're still planning ahead. I think there's a lot of resilience out there, certainly in the sectors that we are touching. So fingers crossed we do come out of this more quickly than some of the worst case scenarios. The fiscal regime off the back of that, the tax regime there, is slightly fearful of that. We do need some progressive policies that encourage that. But look, let's stay optimistic. It doesn't serve us to be otherwise.
I couldn't agree more. Paul Forburn's back, actually, with going back to the environmental impact that you suggested, could be a really positive one. But the question really is when things eventually, hopefully, get back to normality, do you really believe that we will change our ways and put environmental considerations ahead of certain business and lifestyle decisions?
Yeah, the answer, I really hope so. I really hope so. And actually, it's on us, isn't it? We've got to keep putting it out there. one of my self-criticisms, criticism of the business community. We've got to keep banging the drum. There's a younger generation coming through that are going to be running these businesses in 10, 15 years time, and they will look at us and say, what were you doing? I've got a 16-year-old daughter, and all she is worried about is the environmental crisis that's looming. And I think we owe it to each other. So it's in our hands. And if enough of us make a stand, we will make it happen. There's more momentum than ever. I'm hopeful that is the way we would go. If I think about private equity environment, then they are looking to invest in ethical funds. I think environmental and sustainability credentials is starting to become a differentiator to win work. We're certainly seeing a lot of that. It's also seen as a byproduct for quality of product, if you're thinking about those sorts of things. So hopefully that, along with the well-being agenda, which has also been brought to the front of people's minds, well-being is a very broad topic. Then I think we've just got to say we're on our way, but we own it on this call.
Well, actually, interesting. Zoe Williams is, I'm sorry, my screen's jumping around here, has also asked, be interested in your views on what the effect of COVID will have on the 18 to 30 generation.
Well, I've got an 18-year-old son who's just dodged his A-levels. So at the moment, he's feeling pretty chipper. But to my mind, he's lost. He's missed a rite of passage there. It's difficult, isn't it? I think the school. Even the 14, 15, 16-year-olds. It looks difficult, doesn't it, in terms of the hiatus from an educational perspective. Unemployment does look like it's going to spike. So again, that becomes a real concern. We're relying on government policy here, aren't we? We're relying on government policy in terms of how do we recreate those jobs? How do we rebalance the economy? Is absolutely critical. Going backwards to 3 million plus unemployed in the long term is almost unthinkable, quite frankly. I do think, again, coming back to necessity being the mother of all invention, I think there's a trend where, the boilerplate, you need a degree to go anywhere. I think that's falling away. I think, people are at home, connected on their MacBooks, and they're all inventing little businesses. I know my son is doing that. He's putting his time productively. So I think, the gig economy, startups will burgeon. And I think, the economy could bounce back in a very different way. I think, there's a new generation coming through that think about things very, very differently. I certainly think in far more straight lines than a lot of the younger employees in my organisation who can see a different way to solving problems. I think a lot of the onus is on them to play this out, and we need to give them the environment that they can thrive within it.
Thanks for that. Nicola is interested to know how you would advise the government on how to get people to trust the data issues with track and trace.
Well, you build trust by being able to admit you get it wrong. What would we give for someone just to put their hand up and just say, look, this is tougher than we thought. Here's what we're trying to achieve. Here's why it's important. Here's our route by which we think we're going to fix it. And here's how we need you to help. I just don't understand why that is so difficult. I think, that you can underestimate the public. I think if you bring them into it, then I think, we'll all be on the same page. At the moment, if there was an app released, I'm not sure many of us would be minded to do anything with it, because we'd wonder where the data was going. We'd think it would be futile. We'd want to see it proven that it was working before we took part in it. And that in itself will defeat it, because people need to download it before it starts working. So you've got the negative cycle. So I think we need some proper grip. We need some proper grip that faces into this, because without the track and trace, we're in a difficult spot. And I think it should be an absolute priority in terms of how that is going to work.
Ian Price is back again on a slightly different tack. Do you think that the situation has made it harder to level the economy? The situation has proved that you no longer have to be in the City of London or South East to function successfully?
Is it harder to level up? Is that the question? Yeah,
the situation that made it harder, or I guess argued either way, or actually easier to level up.
Yeah, the leveling up. Yeah, arguably, you think about a mass exodus from London into the regions. We'd all like to see a bit of that, wouldn't we? They can bring some of their money down to Wales for a start. I think we'd all be welcome for that local spending. look, it's critical. I think, we're so imbalanced, aren't we? In terms of that southeast bias. And I do think, the city is a ghost town and will be until the end of the year, is my understanding. That's a long way back. It's a long way back when you've actually, made it work wherever you are in the home counties and whatever, and suddenly you've broken that connection. So I think that definitely gives us an opportunity. I guess the counter to that is, you're also sort of giving businesses no reason to move their headquarters either. So there's a flip side to it. I think ultimately, we've just got to get on the front foot. Wales as a region needs some really progressive policies in terms of being the right place to work, the right place to live, the right place to holiday. We've got to look open for business and make sure the infrastructure is there to support it.
Yeah, I kind of feel there's a big opportunity for tourism if we can get all the conditions right for us. It really is a big opportunity. Actually, topically, just on that, actually Paul's back. We had Frank Holmes from Gambit talking to us last time round, and part of the survey that he mentioned suggested that there could be some positive impact for manufacturing in Wales, and he cited medical supplies as one example. Are you starting to see that amongst your clients, or is it too early to tell yet?
We're not seeing that specifically, but what we're seeing is a real bias in terms of, or a real change in demands of customers and suppliers alike. So everybody's pivoting, and again, you go back to data and culture and the maturity of leadership, to be able to pivot what you do into that area. So I do think there is a huge opportunity if we get on the front foot with it.
Okay. Well, as Q&As go, that was actually quite a lengthy session. We've had a lot of questions, but I'm going to draw it to a close now. So thanks for that, Alyn, and thank you to everyone for your questions as well. I guess just normally we have someone who offers a vote of thanks, and I guess under these circumstances that's me for now. And they also provide some reflections on it. And for me, first of all, it's great to have a business that's got 40-odd thousand clients, a lot of them outside of the UK, based here in Cardiff. But for me, it was really interesting just to reflect, I think, on how are we going to achieve well-being of our staff and our customers and various stakeholders. What are the key things we have to do to manage risks? And if we do all of those things, how much more sustainable our business can be and how better it will function. It was great to hear your journey of how you at Alcumus have approached the situation, and both during your address and through the questions. You really have given us a lot of views on the future for the economy, both in terms of risks, but also in terms of opportunity. So on behalf of the club, thank you very much for addressing the club. Just to conclude from me, I hope you have enjoyed again this virtual meeting and gained some useful insights for helping your organisations take them forward in these circumstances. And any feedback on this evening is always helpful as we look to enhance the format if we have to for the future. Our next planned meeting is on Monday, the 27th of July, when we will hear from Deb Bowen-Rees, who's Chief Executive of Cardiff International Airport, and she'll be discussing the challenges facing the airport, but also the travel sector in general. So again, should be very topical and interesting. Please keep an eye on the website though, as we may squeeze a further event in earlier July, which at present will continue to be free of charge, and obviously best place is to book online. As I mentioned last time, we are working on the normal event program for next season with a speaker program already in place, and details of this will be announced at a launch event, which we will notify you of in due course. But clearly, of course, we are going to have to monitor things closely, and we'll obviously continue to follow government guidelines as to public gatherings. So I'd just like to thank our season sponsors again. That's Brewin Dolphin, Cardiff Metropolitan University and Odgers. It would be nice now for us all to go and have a glass of wine and chat over dinner, but clearly that can't happen. So in the meantime, stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you again next month. Thank you very much.